He he has taught in countries around the world, including taking mindfulness to the Muslim world. He's taught in the office of the Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates, and also at the King's University in Morocco. He's taught mindfulness in the German Parliament, the European Commission, the European Parliament, and 2 years ago he won the contract to teach mindfulness in the United Kingdom Parliament. He serves on the board of the Oxford Mindfulness Foundation with me, and he's one of the most innovative mindfulness teachers I know. He's got great insight, great wisdom, and great compassion, and he's going to share that with us tonight as he talks about normalizing mental health hygiene and the trends affecting our mental hygiene as individuals and as a society, and what role mindfulness can play at an organizational and societal level. So welcome, Chris. Croeso Gymru. It's great to have you here, and the floor is yours. Or the screen is yours.
The screen, exactly. My floor is my floor, please. So it's lovely to be here. Thank you very much. And actually, I'm glad that you managed to get a little bit of a Welsh greeting in. I'm delighted. It's the first time I've ever been spoken to in Welsh, Chris. Thank you. And, I've done a number of things together with this gentleman, Chris, here. And I always introduce myself as the lesser of the two Chris's. So I will start that again, because I think that's the right way to go. So anyway, so I'm Chris, that's right. And maybe just a bit of background, I grew up in Asia as a child. So, a little bit, there's, you could say Buddhism was kind of in the background for me. And then I've been practicing mindfulness for 30 years. And, including, I did a few 3-month-long retreats. So I think it's something that I care deeply about. And my day job, when I'm not sitting doing nothing, is that I run a company and we do mindfulness training pretty much around the world at the moment. Last year, I think we did it in 15 languages. And what I'll talk a little bit about is, and I think, and like Chris said, by coincidences, we've ended up working a lot in politics too. So we work a lot in politics. And which is something which I guess deeply affects me. I have never met a more stressed group of individuals than politicians, and who are as unequipped to deal with that stress as anybody I've ever met. So, it's a bit of a challenge for them. And something, I guess, which is close to my heart, just thinking a little bit more about I guess, where does this journey go to? Okay, so what I'll do is I'll just share a little bit of some insights. As Chris said, I'm a bit of a nerd. I find data helpful. I work in a very data rich world, but I'll share some data. We'll do some practices together, and we'll talk a little bit about what does mindfulness mean at the organizational or societal level. Okay. So, and please don't be shy to ask questions, to disagree with me. I delight in disagreement. Anything like that, okay? But, I think, it'd be good before we start to just do a brief practice, okay? And I'll be doing a number of practices in our time together. And they're a little bit different in their nature, perhaps, okay? So just, try them out and see, I'm sure you're familiar with them in some ways, but perhaps they're not so familiar. And I just want to start by, just taking a good posture. And, just the invitation at first to just notice, okay? So don't even close your eyes. Just take a moment to actually notice. So, and you might want to just, notice physically, first of all, how are you doing? So I just had a nice, lovely berry tart. And I nibbled some apple pie too. So I noticed that heaviness in my stomach and the aftertaste in my mouth. So physically, I noticed that sense of heaviness and warmth. So just notice whatever you notice in your body. Notice your muscle tension. And just as you're examining your body, begin to see if you can notice things that you've never noticed before in your body. So perhaps just see which of your toes are squeezed together the most. Okay, so each toe has a different degree of pressure on it, so you might just tune into that. Notice your toes. Do the outer toes feel a bit more scrunched up against your shoe than the inner toes, perhaps? Or perhaps you notice the movement of the fabric of your shirt or blouse in your armpit, just as you're breathing. Just see if you can notice that slight movement in your armpit with each breath. And see if you can notice any humidity on your skin anywhere. So you're just noticing subtle things. And just drop any particular directed noticing. And just try to just remain present. With whatever experience arises. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's the sound of my voice. Maybe it's a smell. Okay. So, just curious, did anybody notice something in particular that maybe you hadn't noticed before, either in the space you're in or in your body? Did anybody notice anything? The heat of your Indian curry on my tongue. Okay, exactly. So, Chris, I guess you didn't just eat the curry now, did you? You ate it some time ago, yeah? You're on mute still.
An hour ago, but there's a lingering aftertaste, which I was only aware of when I actually listened to my tongue.
Yeah, exactly. So, and I think that this is just a very important starting point, actually, that, most of what our brain does is filter out, actually. It filters out all of these signals, and we don't notice, okay? And only when we begin to sit with a question mark do we actually begin to notice things. Okay? And this is, I think, a very important point, in today's life. I just worked with, this morning I worked with a group in China, and I had worked with them last week. And, I kind of said to them, so, how was the week? And they just, all looked at each other. They're like, yeah, has a week passed, really? It was just, they just didn't notice actually that a whole week had passed. They were so full of, activity. And if there's no space, there's no contrast. Okay. So, I think that this is just a starting point for our whole conversation, is that if we don't stop and make space, then there's no contrast. And if there's no contrast, we don't see much. Okay. Okay, so, and this is just a very, I think what I'll do is a little bit later, I'll show you the science behind that. It's not, it sounds like a profound statement, but, it's kind of just the mind, it's just how the mind works, okay? So I'm just going to share my screen. I have here presentation. There we are. Share. So there we are. Let me just go into full screen mode. So, okay. Yeah, so I think I introduced myself already. Welcome to all of you, of course, too. And I think, and this is one of the first things, by the way, that I do, or that we do in our work, is that we just help people just notice, free of any language or baggage, to just begin to notice things that are going on in their lives, okay? And many people don't like what they see, but perhaps that's why they don't like to look, but I think that's the journey. And I think that, for me, that's the starting point of what mindfulness is about. In my eyes, mindfulness is about looking at reality as it is, fundamentally, and just really noticing actually what goes on outside of us and inside of us, okay? And I want to just do that and begin to, cast a lens or look at what we see in society. And again, I said this, I apologize. I'm going to do this through the lens of data, because that's a little bit how I function or how my world functions. But it's just it's just a lens. It's just a way of looking at reality.
Chris, can I just for a moment? I'm getting the display.
Are you getting the split screen? Are you? Apologies.
Yeah, and they're wonderful slides. I think we'll get a better look.
There we are.
Wonderful.
Does that work?
I haven't got anything now. Yeah, that's it. That's fine.
Super. Exactly. Okay. So just as a starting point, and by the way, I'm always careful about this. I think whenever, there's a danger whenever we as whatever mindfulness people get together, we have a certain way of talking about things, which is like, we talk about the problems or whatever else. But I think it's just important to remind ourselves that actually a lot of things are getting better. Okay, so I don't know if you know this website. It's a very good website called Gapminder, or from the book Factfulness, where you can get all the statistics of all the things that are actually getting better in the world, okay? Because we tend to always look at the things that are not so good. And I think it is important to just notice that, actually. If we look at, the percentage of girls in school, the percentage of the world that is protected, nature is protected, things like the availability of water for people, or even literacy, for example, that there's tremendous growth, actually, in many, many fields. And I think it's important to say that, because I think, if we look realistically at life, we have to see all these aspects, okay? There's many good things. And in fact, many bad things are getting less, whether it's cancer, plane crash deaths, things like smallpox deaths, ozone depletion, or whatever else. There's many, many things that are, bad things that are getting worse, okay? And I think that this is very generally important when we step into this kind of discussion of, let's say, societal trends, that we are aware of our own tendencies, okay? And, it's very much, in our nature, and I'm sure you will teach that in the courses, we tend to generalize, or we're driven by our fear instinct, or blame instinct, or urgency instinct, okay? Or to catastrophize things. And those are not so helpful, okay? So, I think that that's, for me, an important background that I always try to do, because there's always a danger of, just seeing the challenges. Okay. So I think that, goes, actually, it's a very important point about the general point I'm trying to make today about mental hygiene. Okay. One of the challenges is that we tend to feed ourselves on the negative in general as a society. Okay. But I'll show you some things about that. Okay. So, having started with, there's good news, it's also important to acknowledge, of course, that there are challenges. Okay. There are challenges that many of us are facing, and especially in the world that I am, the organizational world, or the world of, you could say, humans at work, there really is a overall ongoing rise in the perception of stress. Okay, so this is data from about 150,000 people worldwide in workforces around the world, okay, including Asia, including Africa, including, of course, Europe and North America. And essentially, if you look at the data, it says from 2009 to 2021, over the period of 12 years, we've had basically a 48% increase in the percentage of people who report daily perception of stress, okay? And also strong increases in worry, anger, and sadness, okay? So this is a very important, background, is that there is a heightened perception of stress in the world. It's not just imagination, okay? And coupled with that, we know what happens with people when they get stressed. This is what's called the Yerkes-Dodson curve. Yerkes-Dodson curve describes how people behave at different levels of stress arousal. So the bottom axis shows, the stress arousal. And you see that for a while, of course, people's ability to perform increases. We all know when we're lazy, when we're putting off stuff, we just don't have the skills or the energy to do things. But actually, after a while, we get to, you could say, a high level of whatever we're doing, whether it's playing squash, piano, whatever we're doing, writing, working. But actually, then it begins to drop off, okay? And we tend to go into exhaustion, panic, restlessness, collapse, and burnout. And this is very important. Modern society, by its nature, pushes us to the right, okay? Knowledge work is by its nature limitless. You can always create more work, more analysis, more whatever. And even if it isn't work, stimulus is also limitless, okay? And that's a very important thing to understand about today's society, that stimulus is just as much as a factor of stress arousal, okay? And I think one of the things we know as mindfulness practitioners, we all begin to notice how addicted we become to stimulus. And fundamentally, mindfulness is very boring, actually. And we often have difficulty resting with the boredom of whatever it is, okay? So the more we are addicted to stimulus, the more we continue to push ourselves to the right, because stimulus and stress are inseparable, okay? So this is a fundamental feature of the modern age. And you see that in outcomes, okay? So when you look at this is data post-COVID, the increase in the global incidence of depressive disorders or anxiety disorders, okay? So there's and this is data from the Lancet, came out in 2022. So really there's an increase now, perhaps connected to screen time, perhaps connected to news, perhaps connected to whatever it is, but there's a global increase in depressive disorders and anxiety disorders, okay? So we're being pushed to the right of that curve. That is the nature of what's going on in today's age, okay? And like I said, if you look at the data on how much people are on digital media every day, digital media is stimulation, okay? So, an average in some countries is 6-7 hours per day. So whether it's work, whether it's digital media, whether it's, people's problems in life, whatever it is, something is overstimulating their nervous system, okay? And that's why one of the first things I think that we all need to learn to do as a society, and that we learn to do as practitioners, is to just relax, okay? And my passport says I'm German. And if you say to somebody in German, entspann dich, just relax, it's like an insult. Do you know what I mean? Like if I say to Chris, just relax, it's almost like an insult in today's society. But actually it's a skill, okay? Because given that most people are prone to overstimulation and overactivation of what's called the sympathetic nervous system, the ability to relax is a skill, okay? And I thought, again, let's just do a small practice, okay? So because different practices work on different aspects of our neurophysiological makeup, okay? And for this practice, just, again, take a good posture. And above all, just try to lengthen your out breath, okay? So that your out breath becomes about twice as long as your in breath, okay? So you don't have to force it, don't force it. But you're just trying to allow your out breath to fade at the end. Perhaps there's a small gap at the end of your out breath before the in breath starts again. And just see what happens to your embodied sense as you do that, okay? So I'll just let you do that quietly for 2 minutes. Allowing the out breath to lengthen, but not forcing it. And just keep attending to the out breath. Okay, so again, what happens to you when you just allow the out breath to lengthen? What happens? So feel free to write in the chat or just speak. What happens to your embodied sense of self? Okay. Okay. So how would you describe that fine space, Liz? It's very interesting what you wrote.
I felt I'm very much here.
Yeah.
But I felt actually a space around me that I'm still here. I'm in surroundings. I'm looking at the beautiful slide or out of the window. Got a lovely view there.
Yeah.
Felt around me.
Yeah.
Not a bubble because it wasn't switching to keep me out of there, but I just
Yeah. Yeah.
space around me just gently expanding.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. So this is very important thing. So all of those things that have been written are true too: calming, soothing, anchoring, connecting, heart rate slowing down. So essentially what happens when we lengthen the out breath, and when the out breath is about double the length of the in breath, that it basically causes the nervous system to switch from sympathetic activation to parasympathetic recovery. Okay. And interesting enough, our sense of self is very much tied up with sympathetic activation. Okay. We wind ourselves up, as we know, and when we begin to unwind ourselves, the boundary between self and other gets weaker. Okay. Perceptual boundary. And part of what you notice perhaps, Liz, is just your senses opened up. Okay. So it's very interesting how that works, that relaxation, and I guess you practiced a fair bit. When you relax, you begin to also reconnect to your senses and automatically are more connected to the world through the senses. Okay. And this is well known. We'll talk about what networks are involved in that in a moment. Okay. But and I don't want to oversimplify practice. So I don't want to, just make practice a little manipulation of the nervous system. It's just a piece of what happens in practice. Okay. But it's a useful piece. Okay. And especially for today's age, if everyone would just learn to relax more often, the world would be a different place. Okay. Okay. So this is, another aspect, and I'm just going to take you through two more aspects, and then I'll, begin to show the whole journey. Okay. So, one aspect is this overstimulation, which we have in today's society. And another aspect is actually the heightened negativity. Okay. So this is an analysis of negativity in news. Most American newspapers, they did an extensive, longitudinal analysis of sentiment. Okay. And basically the analysis says there is been a significant switch from positive language to increasingly negative language. Okay. And I think most of us know that this is connected to the fact that, in England, you say, if it bleeds, it leads. Okay. So this is the, kind of statement that, basically once news becomes an attention-based issue, then negativity gets more attention than positivity does. Okay. The fact that 23,000 planes landed yesterday, it interests less people than the fact that one plane crashed. Okay. And there's good reasons for that from the evolutionary point of view. Okay. And we see that negative effect. This is the Global World Happiness Report 2022 is increasing worldwide. Okay. So we see an increase in perception of negativity. That's one of the strongest increases. Positive effect is kind of stable. So positive effect is the number of people who say they had a positive mood, positive experience, and negative effect is of course the opposite. So we see that there is a heightened, perception of negativity growing in the world. Okay, and this is very much based upon the information economy. Okay, so I said before that our mind actually perceives only a limited amount. So Chris did not perceive his spicy curry on his tongue. Okay? Because most of what the mind does is filter out stuff which is not perceived to be relevant. Okay. Sorry, Vishwapani, go ahead.
Yeah. On the right hand graph, am I right in thinking that the pandemic was good for people's state of mind? There seems to be a downward tick.
Yeah, they didn't conclude that. So the report was issued in 2022. The data was from 2021. They were undefined about whether they could conclude that was the case.
But something happened that there was a decrease.
Well, first it ticked up, huh? So first notice that it ticks up. So is it a heightening of negativity and then a return to baseline? Probably more like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So yes, anyway, so Chris's curry remained unnoticed because his mind filtered it out. But because we have a tendency to notice the negative, when we have an overload of information, means that our window of attention, our window of perception gets filled with the negative. Okay? So this is another systematic issue in today's society, that the more information we have, the more we pick out the negative. And therefore our perception, and you know how, same thing with your email box. You know, if you look at your email box, 50 emails or whatever it is, 30 emails, 120 emails, you look at the ones that are somehow negative first, because I have to look at that, okay? So with a limited window of attention, we fill up our window of attention with negativity, okay? So this is let's say, another aspect of lack of mental hygiene, okay? And let's just see what that does to us. So let's again take a posture. Let's just take an upright posture. Okay, so just first of all, just take a moment to relax again. Maybe you connect back to the taste of curry in your tongue, or the sensation of your feet on the ground, or perhaps your heaviness of your buttocks on the chair. So just take a moment to come back to, sensing the body. Perhaps notice each finger. Perhaps you notice that each finger has a slightly different tension and different angle. And just, shift now and bring to mind, so you're calling up in your mind the memory of a stressful event, something difficult. So a difficult conversation, perhaps losing a loved one, difficult meeting, work pressure, conflict, and just bring that to mind and notice what that does to your breathing, to your heart rate, to your facial expression. And now bring to mind a recent happy event. So perhaps a nice dinner in a beer garden or outside with friends, or a nice moment of children, or a time of your pet, dog, cat, or some time in nature. Just bring that to mind. And again, notice what that does to your breathing, to your facial expression, to your heart rate, to your muscle tension. Okay. So again, open your eyes if your eyes were closed, or, and again, just notice now what happened when you brought to mind a stressful event. What happened to your breathing? What happened to your heart rate? What happened to your muscle tension? What happened to your facial expression? And again, either write it in the chat or just speak. Okay, so Sharon, you clench your jaw, yeah? Okay, interesting, yeah. Any other responses? Okay, so tightness in the heart space, interesting. It's nice, vivid description there. Probably wasn't a nice feeling, but tensed, narrowed, and slumped, Daryl, okay. Shortened, okay. Mouth turned down. Chris, yep. Okay. Yeah, so, it's interesting to notice these things, okay, that just by what we think of, we change our physiology, okay? And again, what happened when you thought of the nice things? What happened when you thought of the happy moment, time with friends, or opened up, okay? So open up your whole body, your perception opened up, Stephen, okay? Super, yeah. Other voices, inner warmth. Interesting. Again, Laura, very nice precision in the language there. You feel this little bit of warmth, don't you, in the heart region, in the chest region. You smiled. Liz, smile spread across your face, expanded again, felt lighter. Okay. Smile, totally different immediate energy. Sorry, but yeah. Yeah. So I mean, this is just interesting to notice. Okay. How many people do you think know that but just by what they think of, they change their physiology? How many people do you think know that? Do you think most people know that or not?
I think maybe most people do know that intuitively, but whether they act upon it or remember it at the appropriate time is a whole other thing.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think actually when we say this kind of stuff, because it's empirically true in the sense of we all feel it most of the time, we kind of know it, but we, as you say, we don't know it with awareness, okay? But again, it's important thing to point out to people that actually the whole day we're putting our physiological state into different states, depending on what we think of. And above all, depending on what we direct our attention to, okay? There's a lot of very interesting research on this. You show people, the same people, a picture of various shapes, and some people will visually see, like more like a bat, and this looks like more like a dragon or so on, and some people will see, oh, this looks like a mountain and a lake, People will perceive reality differently, okay? Just depending upon how they are, of course, past experiences and so on and so forth. Yeah. So, and this is, it kind of gets more extreme when you look into modern research of neuroscience, is that we don't perceive reality, we predict reality, okay? So, it's very interesting to notice that how we see the world, how we perceive the world affects our physiology. And depending on what we pay our attention to, and unfortunately, we are continually feeding ourselves, paying our attention to, all negative. We see more negativity in the news, and we direct our attention more to negative things. So that's actually, I worked a lot with the European Commission on this. It's really a difficult issue for society, that actually a lot of things are getting better, but actually everyone thinks things are getting worse. 50% usually of the population think things have never been this bad. Okay, when the facts say actually it's not quite true. Okay? So this is another challenge. Is basically this another, and I keep showing you aspects of mental hygiene actually, and they're very similar to, stress is a form of junk food. You could say this negativity, positivity, perhaps is the sugar balance. Do you know what I mean? But we basically have a lot of habits that are not good for us. Okay. And finally, I just wanted this last aspect. We are social beings, humans, fundamentally social beings. Okay. Those of you who've ever looked at this, our brains are born about 30% formed. A cow's brain or a giraffe's brain are about 80 to 90% formed at birth, because a cow or giraffe especially has to be able to run within, an hour or whatever. So therefore, it's born with the brain primarily formed. But our brain is unformed at birth. So therefore, our brain is wired in the interaction. Okay. So therefore, it's true that we have deeply social brains. We are wired to interact. Okay. And this is deeply visible in how we function. Okay? And again, you see, this is from America, data from 2013 to 2021. Mm. The percentage of time people spend alone is increasing. And this percentage of time people spend with friends or companions is decreasing. Okay. And if you look at people at their happiness, depending upon whether they're alone a lot or whether they're with time with friends, you see big differences in those people who spend a lot of time with friends versus those people who, or friends or family, those who don't. Okay, so there's a longitudinal study, 85 years of data at Harvard, which says that one of the strongest predictors of longevity and happiness is actually social fitness, your social life, your interaction with others. Okay. So, and we see that there's, for example, in teenagers, this is also in the World Happiness Report, you see that there's a decreasing in-person interactions, decreasing sleep, increasing internet usage, and also decreasing happiness. Okay. So this is another aspect of something which is not healthy for us. So again, I used the word healthy or not good for our mental hygiene. Okay. And the UK is one of the leaders on this topic, that loneliness is a bigger killer than obesity. Okay, so you take two people, you take the two Chris's here, Chris 1 and Chris 2, who are about the same age and who are about each equally handsome, but one does not have a partner and one does. Okay, and the person without the partner has a higher mortality rate, okay, than that person with the partner. Okay. And you see that in the working world, that the sense of belonging is declining. People do not feel so connected to their colleagues. They don't spend time with their colleagues.
Mm.
Okay. And again, we can just do a small practice now. Just to get the taste of these aspects, these changes in our system. Okay? And just just take a moment again to settle in. See if you can settle in to noticing your feet on the ground, or maybe you notice your belly moving with each breath. Perhaps even you notice the pressure. If you have a belt on against your belt, just notice little things. When you settle in a bit, just bring to mind somebody you care deeply about, perhaps a child, a partner, a loved one, and just visualize them before your mind's eye. And if you have a memory of them suffering or struggling, perhaps a child who was, sad or felt alone, or a partner who lost a loved one, or somebody who was struggling with an issue, just bring that to mind and send that person warmth. And maybe you can even send them the feeling of love or care, or wish them well. Sometimes it's helpful to imagine holding them, or actually physically, embracing them if you have difficulty. And just if you notice a sense of warmth in your chest area, just hold that gently. There's a sense of tenderness there and warmth with a little vulnerability. Just hold that softly. Okay, so again, thank you. So, again, anybody want to share what happens, what your experience is when you bring to mind something you care about? What happens to perhaps your chest area, or to your breathing, or even to your face? Okay, wow. You feel deeply happy, eyes well up, chest expands, exactly. So really you feel the warmth and some tenderness. Warmth, Sharon, too. Thank you. Okay. Open, inclusive connection. Thank you, Chris. Softening. Yeah, okay. So, yeah, I mean, you know, these are heart area feels warm and tender. Love that phrase of holding it lightly. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah. So, yeah, so, you know, these are practices we do. We practice something, you know, we work with our mind and our body, which brings changes. So, you know, essentially what I've been talking about is that actually there's different zones in our inner states, okay? And so one way to characterize our inner experience is to talk about the level of arousal, which is the left axis from high to medium to low. So this is the sympathetic nervous system axis, okay? So this is not something I've invented. This is, you know, something which is kind of well established. And then you can look at the valence of a situation, whether, you know, it's negative, yuck, you know, or positive. Okay, so, you know, for example, if I had the pleasure of picking up Chris Ruan at the railway station today, then I would have a bit of arousal. I'm looking forward to seeing him, but it'd be positive because, you know, I'm just looking forward to spending time with him. Okay, so that's, you know, what's called positive stress. Okay, but perhaps if I'm, you know, have to give a presentation or I'm about to miss my plane, you know, then I might have negative stress. Okay. But it is both some degree of arousal. And on the other hand, I might be, you know, just had a nice warm apple pie and kind of a little bit droopy in my chair. So I might be calm and contented. Okay. So this is the landscape of our inner being. And there's the 4 zones in that space. Okay. One is, of course, intensity stress. And stress is not bad per se. We need it. You know, when I'm playing squash, when I'm, you know, whatever, driving a car, I need some degree of attention. Okay. But of course, I can't live in that space the whole time. And what modern life is doing is pushing us into this top left space. It is making us more negative. It is making us more aroused. Okay. And that's not healthy. There are other zones. We need to be able to circulate through these zones. We can't stay in one zone. We shouldn't avoid one zone either. We should be able to circulate through these zones: growth, learning, regeneration, recovery, and also unlearning, letting go. Okay. So sadness, boredom are actually not bad experiences. They're important experiences. You know, in some sense, like I said, you know, mindfulness practice is just getting used to boredom, actually. It's a very, very boring practice. Okay, we just sit and nothing happens. Okay. So this is, I think, you know, kind of modern life is pushing us to the top right. And essentially what is healthy is to circulate through these zones. Okay. And especially the more we are activated by stress, by arousal, the more the middle zones get more narrow. Okay, so this is well known that the window of what's called tolerance, in which we can regulate ourselves, gets narrower. Okay, you have that through trauma, you have that through a dysregulation of the nervous system, you have that through, you know, thinking patterns and so on. But essentially, what's happening to a lot of people is that they flip-flop between, you know, stress, high arousal, and then zoning out. And often that's why people think mindfulness is zoning out, because they sit down and for the first time they're sitting down and not doing anything and they fall asleep. And they think that's great, but it's, you know, it's not really learning anything. Okay. So this is one of the things that happens in today's age, is that people are no longer able to regulate themselves and move naturally through these cycles. They think that the lower left is bad, to be avoided. They'd like to stay kind of, you know, somewhere in the arousal states, but they don't actually know how to regulate themselves. Okay, and this is what we did actually in these exercises. We actually moved, you could say, around this inner landscape. Okay, and when you're not able to regulate yourself, you know, you see a growth in emotional outrage versus reality, that essentially people overreact to things. So this is very interesting data looking at the spread of false news and real news online. Okay. And all of the red charts indicate false news, and the axes show in LinkedIn, in Twitter, the reach and the depth of people reading it. Okay, and you see that basically in a world of heightened reactivity, false news spreads a lot further and a lot faster and True News does, okay? And so this is, again, is what I mean by mental hygiene, okay? So, you know, a few hundreds, maybe 1,000 years ago, we didn't have physical hygiene. Therefore, disease spread quickly. And I don't know if you know, but you know, when the bubonic plague arrived in Genoa, in Italy, what everyone did was they gathered together to pray loudly, which is about the worst thing you can do, because, you know, bubonic plague is spread by aerosols. Okay, so, you know, they basically behaved in a way which is not conducive to stopping the spread of things. Okay, and this is what we see in modern society, that when it comes to mental well-being, so we've learned about physical hygiene and physical nourishment and physical training, but we haven't really learned about mental nourishment. We feed ourselves on too much stimulus, on, you know, viral stuff, which is not true. It poisons our minds. And this is, you know, of course, another way of looking at what mindfulness does. And this is, you know, I keep showing people the data on the research basis of mindfulness. You know, it's really reaching a very strong research basis. This is the amount of studies published per year with mindfulness entitled our topic. And I often compare it to other forms of intervention. Okay, so this is comparing it to positive psychology or NLP or neurofeedback or even cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, and you know, last year or 2 years ago, mindfulness overtook cognitive behavioral therapy in terms of its extent of research basis. Okay. So, you know, I think we all know this. We're all sitting here together because we're kind of fans, but I think it's really important to understand that mindfulness really can transform, you know, some of the dragons of the age, you know, and I think it's, of course, we're, you know, here, this is Welsh mindfulness, so we have to have at least one dragon in it. Okay. And I thought we're slaying the dragons, but that's not politically correct. We don't want to slay dragons, but we want to transform them. But, you know, when you look at how does, you know, what is the story of slaying the dragons? Always, you know, transforming a difficulty, a demon, an illness in a society, okay, and bringing health to that situation, okay? And I think that fundamentally, when we look through what does mindfulness do, mindfulness fundamentally affects positively many aspects of what I just described, okay? So when we look at the dragons of this age, as people are always on, they're not aware, they don't notice the beauty of the trees, or they don't notice where their food comes from, or the clothes that they wear, how, you know, how wonderful the fabric is. They're often distracted. Their attention jumps from thing to thing. They're emotionally quite reactive, or they could become emotionally quite reactive, which makes them more susceptible to the negative. They, you know, consume the negative. And often negative people that are distracted and, you could say, you know, unaware, tend to be unempathic. Not everybody, of course. And, you know, also unreflected, not really taking the meta view of their own life, okay? So I think that, you know, this is one list, whatever this list is, we can also look at what mindfulness does, okay? And mindfulness actually cultivates important skills. It cultivates the ability to relax. And also, like Liz, like you experience it, actually, when you relax, relaxing means that you begin to settle into the experience of the body, for example. Not for everyone. We know that sometimes that's difficult for some people, but in general. And we then notice, because our sensory gates are open, we notice the sense perceptions. We become more aware of actually perspective, contrast from the self, from the narrow view of the self, okay? We learn to attend and be focused, you know, either attend in a general way or be focused in a specific way, and also learn to regulate our internal emotional state, move around this landscape, okay, that I showed you, which also makes us resilient. And also balancing the negative and the positive. So we regulate the emotional intensity and we balance the negative and the positive. And thus we're able to resonate. The more we've experienced emotions ourselves in a genuine way, the more we're able to resonate, have empathy for others, and also learn to be reflective, okay? And all of these things, you know, that I'm showing you are actually basically, you know, there are neural parallels of all of these, okay? So relaxing, being present is the ability to switch from sympathetic nervous system arousal to parasympathetic activation, okay? So this is, well established in science, okay? Noticing, be aware is shifting from the activation of the narrative network, the blah, blah, blah network, sometimes called default mode network, to the direct experience network, that we have heightened sensory awareness. Yeah? When we learn to attend, we actually stabilize the attentional networks, above all the executive control network and the orienting network, and also the salience networks, okay? When we learn to regulate, we are actually cultivating an awareness, interoceptive awareness of bodily states, okay? Heightened bodily awareness, which allows us to identify, name, and regulate emotional states in the body. And being positive is actually learning to balance the activation of the prefrontal cortex and maintain approach behavior, openness, curiosity. So I have a friend, John is visiting me here. John is 76. He's just across the room here. And, he's been for 10 days here in a different town. And, he's open. He's always curious. He maintains approach behavior and doesn't get, kind of irritable with, things are so different in Germany or whatever else. And he's actually gone to the gym a number of times. In my gym, he even got thrown out almost because I tried to sneak him in with my gym pass. Anyways, he mastered that too. Okay. And then, we can resonate. So resonation actually is interesting enough, is having the ability to have a felt sense in the body of other people's experience. Okay. So we feel when we have this, Juliana, you said tears welled up in your eyes. You had a bit of sense of the sadness or the suffering of somebody and the warmth, okay? And reflecting is actually being able to cultivate metacognitive awareness and shifting activation from primarily left brain activation to right brain activation in terms of informational processing style. Okay? So all the things that we like to talk about as mindfulness practitioners in this kind of slightly esoteric language is, well validated by science as underpinned. It doesn't mean that it's all explained by neurophysiology, but there are neural correlates of this, okay? And so another way of looking at what we're doing with mindfulness, and this is maybe for the young people, is slowing down, waking up, settling down, riding the waves, cheering up, tuning in, and learning. Okay, so these are basic skills we're learning as we practice mindfulness. Okay, we're learning basic skills of mental hygiene. Okay, these are skills that protect us from actually being infected by mental ill health, mental disease, being poisoned by misinformation, nourishing ourselves on too much stimulus, which just isn't good for us. Okay, so we will see in 10, 20 years, all the studies will come out about how excessive, they're already out there. The studies on social media are already out there about how excessive social media consumption is not good for us, but we'll see it overall, device usage, screen time, all of those things are already beginning to emerge as, not healthy, as we're consuming something which is not healthy for us, okay? And actually, I was in China 10 days ago, and I was at dinner, and I observed 5 tables of people. I was alone, so I could just watch people. And on 5 tables, there were 3 people, 4 people, 3 people, 4 people. 100% of the people at dinner were on their smartphones, even with other people. Okay, so they're consuming while they were consuming, okay? So, yeah, so what does mindfulness teach us in this world? It teaches us to be realistic, to look precisely, looking at cause and effect, okay? Understanding, interesting, how my state of mind affects my perception or affects my physiology. It's one of the things we learn as we practice. We learn the details of how body and mind are interrelated, okay? We learn to practice that things don't change by themselves, okay? We've learned that in the field of music, that you don't get better playing an instrument unless you practice. We've learned that in the field of sport, okay? We've learned that in the field of exercise, but for some reason, we think it's different when it comes to the mind, okay? And we've learned to focus on building habits. These are things that I, as a practitioner, have learned over these years, okay? And so we have learned habits of physical hygiene, and we've learned to ritualize them, okay? And, now we have to do the same things with mental hygiene, that we can actually actually change the structure of our brain connections. And by practicing, we can cultivate the trait of being open, the trait of being spacious, the trait of being present, the trait of attending, okay? And this is something, just from the organizational side. So for example, all of the things I've talked about are increasingly measurable, okay? So, organizations all about performance and the costs and whatever else. But actually, it's not true. If you look at the data, for example, we see that this is data from some of the work we do, where we measure psychological safety in teams. You see that psychological safety, the fact that people feel well as humans with each other, is the best predictor of team performance there is. There is no better predictor of team performance than psychological safety. Okay? Than the fact that Liz, Chris, and I can just talk honestly and say, hey, how are you doing? Can ask each other how we are and can express care for each other. Okay? That is the best predictor of team performance that there is. Okay, and if you look at what drives psychological safety, there's in teams, as an example, there's 4 habits which drive it. Okay, and these are whether we do check-ins, whether we ask each other how we're doing, whether we're able to name the emotions that are existing at the moment in the team, whether we have equality of turn taking, and whether we actually reflect on our collaboration from time to time. So we've done a lot of assessment on team habits. So, we do a lot of work with mindfulness at large scale with organizations. We assess habits and we say, look, it's not magic. If you have these habits, they will explain 61% of the variance of psychological safety, okay? So, and this is how mindfulness can enrich, whether our school life, our organizational life, our political life. Politics is not going to change until politicians start sitting quietly, or they start agreeing upon asking each other how they're doing, or they perhaps actually start the debate by appreciating what's gone well. Okay, so I had a CEO that I did this with, CEO of a German company, 30,000 people, and I said to him, "Why don't you start your board meetings with what's gone well?" He was like, "What kind of idiot are you? You have no idea." But he did it. And he came back a few weeks later and said, Chris, when we as board members start our board meetings by saying what has gone well in our board meeting, in our areas of the business, it completely changes the tone of the board meetings. Okay? So this is just an example of how an understanding of the mind from mindfulness practice can be anchored as a habit, which can lead as a practice, which can then lead to basically a habit shift. Okay. And this is, just again, data from work with teams. Just seeing how when you anchor mindfulness practice in leadership teams, okay, you have an increase of psychological safety and collective intelligence, the ability of this leadership team to solve problems together. Okay, and this is, again, going back to the work in politics. Politics has pretty low collective intelligence. Okay, when you look at what goes on in politics, because of the adversarial nature of politics, it is not an integration of intelligences, you see, and therefore politics has actually quite low collective intelligence. Okay, and this is an important point, that actually we need high collective intelligence to solve the problems of the age. Yeah, so this is what I wanted to share. Don't be shy to reach out if you have questions. Of course, now too, we'll have some time for questions, or afterwards if you want to reach out to us. But I'll just stop sharing now and just, pause for questions, comments, disagreements, anything. Laura, go ahead.
Chris, thank you so much. I found that so interesting. I thought it was really interesting when you talked about the sort of habits that we need to learn, as it were, to have better mental hygiene. But it's almost like we need to relearn things that we just did naturally as children.
Okay, yeah.
And that's always the thing that surprises me. That when we're talking to people about mindfulness, it's not actually, teaching them anything that they might not already know. It's just reconnecting with some very basic things that we did at an early age, so.
And that is actually a very important point, that the more we settle into mindfulness practice, the more we see it's natural, actually. It's natural to have open senses. It's natural to feel the body. When we feel the body, we actually feel more. We become softer. Okay. One of the things that happens, I find, to people that I work with, is they're very hard. And very hard means they don't feel anymore. Do you know? There's no softness in their being. And, you know, part of what they have to learn is to soften up again, like children, as you said, you know. But often that's the last thing they want.
Yeah.
But so, yeah, so I think that this is one of the things which is so important, that it's, in a sense, as you say, it's returning to something very natural, and therefore it's actually universal. Yeah. And that's why, you know, when Chris introduced me, I worked in the Prime Minister's office of Dubai with an OMC team, and Sheikh Mohammed, you know, the Prime Minister of Dubai, came into the mindfulness session, and he just had a presence. I mean, I'm sorry, you know, you can read all kinds of things about him in the news, and I'm sure there's many things he does which are not wonderful, but he had a presence, and he was very attentive. Okay, and for him, he understood. He writes about meditation in his books, about the importance of meditation.
I don't want to sort of dominate at all, but it's really interesting what you just said there. But I feel quite a big generational gap, even with younger people who really live on their phones. And just the way that I can interact with them, my own children included, you know, has changed so much just in the last 5 years. And for them, it's totally normal to have this overstimulation. And for me, it's not, you know, so the interrelational side of it is really interesting as well, I think, how we might change our habits and the effect it might have on our family and friends as well.
Yeah. And also, you know, to learn that it's just not healthy. You know, I mean, I don't know if you remember, but 50, 60 years ago, 10 to 12-year-old kids would smoke, you know. Just doesn't happen anymore because we know how unhealthy it is. But if you go to Indonesia, if you go to India, it's still happening that, you know, young kids are smoking. Okay. Well, we know it's absolutely a no-no. I mean, you know, and we're kind of beginning to get there with too much sweets and too much fat. You know, not everyone's doing it, of course, but, you know, we kind of know that now, you know, but we don't really know it. But, you know, the research that's coming out is quite strong about how attention spans of children are very strongly negatively affected by devices, and how even their self-regulation of their nervous systems is negatively affected. You know, it's not all doom and gloom, but still, it's, you know, it's, again, it's like chocolate. You know, chocolate is not all doom and gloom, but too much is just not good, you know.
Can I say, Chris, about I think it was Laura that just said it, that we did know it, or it's intuitive, but we kind of forget it. We have sayings like "take 5," this emotional regulation. Take 5, bite your lip, hold your tongue, take a deep breath, count to 5. My heart was in my mouth. I had butterflies in my stomach. That interconnection between the mind and the body. Yeah, it's there, even though it's been written out for 300 years because of Descartes in medicine and in philosophy. We intuitively know it. And one of the best things about this presentation is you've explained the science, and then you've given us a tiny exercise to do, 1 or 2 minutes, and you can actually feel it. You know, the theory and the practice are connected within moments and within minutes. Excellent presentation.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to reach, you could say, modern people through their head. A lot of modern people, not everyone is, of course, like this group, but a lot of people have to reach them through their head. But you have to touch their heart, because the head is not sufficient. But often the gateway to the heart is through the head, unfortunately, nowadays. Anyways, or at least in the world I'm in.
And another aspect of our modern society is the instant nature of, what's the word? You know, people find relief, in inverted commas, very instantly now. And so this idea of practice and remembering and building habits isn't so much a part of our culture, maybe. And
exactly.
People want that instant fix, you know, and they hope that coming to a mindfulness 8-week course is going to transform their life, and it's just the beginning.
You know, and in your world, I don't know exactly where your world are, but you mentioned 8-week mindfulness course. I mean, we try to do as well. I'd say about 60% of what we do is like 6 to 8 week courses, okay? But a lot of companies come like, we have a real issue with burnout and well-being, and we've reserved some time on the annual company town hall. Could you fix this problem in half an hour? Like, what planet are you on? Like, I mean, my goodness, you know what I mean? It's kind of, it's always something I say this back to them. Somebody says to me, "Oh, I tried mindfulness, it didn't work." So it's like jogging for 8 minutes, and then you find it didn't work, or what? And they like go, "Oh, you're right." It's like, what are you saying? I tried it for 8 minutes and it didn't work. Well, no bloody wonder, like. But that's what people expect nowadays. It's kind of hilarious. So you have to take it with humor, but it's kind of, when you think about what.
Chris,
Yes.
just interesting. You're saying about approaching the heart through the head, and you talked about the science being a correlate of something else. I sort of balk a bit at the science, I have to confess, because I have the feeling sometimes that people want science as reassurance rather than as following an evidence-based trail or something like that. And I mean, I'm sure you're right that it's the language that people speak. But I don't know. I just wonder what you think about that. My reluctance and my wish to find other ways to communicate that don't go through the head.
Yeah. So I mean, I think just a few things. First of all, if I show you a picture of a brain, you believe what I say more. I don't know. Did you see that study? There's a study about that if you just show a completely random picture of the brain, like neuroscience has proven, that whatever, that whatever you want to say. So of course it's de-aged, and I think that. So I would differentiate in the working place where I work. There's two aspects. One is, you have just a way people perceive information, process information. Do you see what I mean? It's their gateway. That's actually their gateway to reality. It's information. Okay. So you have to use that gateway. Okay. And then second of all, it's, kind of, if it's on a slide and if it has some numbers, it's more believable than, if it is experiential, whatever. Okay. So I think that's just, kind of the weirdness of that world. I don't think that means that that's reality. I think it's just, that's, like the Buddha said, when he was asked, should we teach in Sanskrit? And he said, no, teach in whatever language people are, or Pali, he was asked. And so I think that that's one aspect of it. And I think that, and this is one thing I think is very important. You will never change people through the head. Okay. You always have to reach them through poetic language or through resonating or through the heart, you see? But the question is, what gets you into the permission to go there? Okay. And in the world I'm in, Mr. Tamdjidi, what is this stuff you're, going to tell us about? I don't know about this. You know what I mean? That kind of world, you have to get the permission for them to relax. Okay, it's interesting what he's going to say. And then, to touch them. Okay, so I think that's just, I think, again, I think it's very important to not confuse the packaging of the medicine with the medicine itself. Okay. And in the world I'm in, the packaging I use is that, but I don't believe in it as being reality. It's just a skillful method of packaging something,
And that's the same, Chris, in the political world. As a former MP, I couldn't go to a minister and say, I've got this great philosophical way or this great spiritual way of looking at a problem and an answer. They want to see the hard science. And so it's a way of moving forwards. It's a foot in the door. And even the skeptics that we've had not the skeptics, people who are agnostic or atheistic, they don't want to hear about the spiritual side of it. But when you hear them discussing these issues after a meditation, you can see that there is their own kind of spirituality expressed in different ways, in different terms, not necessarily in terms of God, but it's horses for courses. It's getting the toe in the door, opening the door and letting people see and Chris Cullen had a lovely way of saying it. He said people come to mindfulness for different reasons. They may come to balance themselves or to improve their executive function or through spirituality. But what they come for and what they get isn't always the same thing. He said mindfulness doesn't come in through the front door, it bubbles up through the floorboards. And I think if you can just open that front door and see what bubbles up.
I feel like the lens that, hi Chris, by the way, and thank you for letting me join all of you today. I'm a friend of Chris's that's just popped in. But it's interesting because I think that it's really a comment on today's age that we have largely devalued the spiritual and philosophical, and we've made science God in a lot of ways. And so I think that the language that you're using is just an access point or a gateway into the common language of what people are valuing in our current culture. You know, there seems to be more of a need for secular language and secular teaching in order to access more people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, people just don't feel themselves, you know, and I say this in a serious manner. And again, it's because they're stressed, and stress actually makes us hard. You know, again, it's physiologically interesting that stress makes us hard, you know, and so people don't feel themselves. And so therefore, if you start straight away with emotive language, feeling language, you know, they're like, you know, you can see them. I do this sometimes just for fun, you know, and you watch them, you're losing half of them straight away because they pick up their phones, they're immediately uncomfortable. They straight away pick up their phones and do something to distract them from the discomfort of, you know, the feeling energy you're radiating, you know. And then, you know, you kind of, well, okay, let me switch to science, you know, and then you see them relaxing, you know, and then you kind of have to reel them in slowly, you know. But, you know, I think I do, one of the things I think strongly about, you know, of course, in California, West Coast, you know, there's this kind of thing of doing neurodharma, you know, that you can do a whole dharmic path, a whole, you know, spiritual path by neuroscience. I don't think you can. I think you always have to surrender understanding. You always have to surrender apprehending things, because that's what we try to do. We try to apprehend reality. And I think any attempt to apprehend reality is already making it small. Okay. So, you know, whenever you enter into really practicing or really going deep, you have to surrender the apprehension of reality. But, you know, we're not at that phase with people when we go to our first, you know, mindfulness class. We're just kind of like, just sit down a little bit and, you know, look at your mind, you know.
Chris?
Go ahead, John.
To just bridge the conversation that you were having a moment ago, what I've discovered a little bit as a skillful means is to, I think of it as starting from a place of I don't know, with positive personal regard for the person I'm working with, and listen, so that I can meet them where they are, whatever that is. So if it's a science model that works, then, you know, fill your boots with that and be adaptive. You know, if the person is able to go right to the heart, which is not common, I find, then, you know, you try to find a way to gently go there. So it's about meeting them where they are. Is the experience that I find most helpful for me.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, when you have one-on-one situations, it's like, it isn't indeed like that. When you have one-to-many situations, then, you know, you have to kind of take an approach.
I think you've given us some really powerful examples of how to find the way in. And I think what you said is absolutely right. And that, you know, people are not going to find anything in their hearts unless they are prepared to be open. And the only way we open it is to find something that's important to them, or they perceive is valuable. We've got such a skewed version of values, haven't we, in terms of what's valuable to me, what's important in my organization, or perhaps even in my family, and certainly for there in classrooms. You know, what do people want? What do they expect of me? What am I supposed to do? And you need to get through all of those, you know, to open, as Chris said, open the door in order for them to have that experience of bubbling up. And what you've done today is given us some really powerful ways in that, you know, just enable us to go around the circle of analysis there, just to see what we can find that actually says, do you know what, this might be worth listening to. Might be worth putting my phone down for a few moments and just join in. And then you've got them. Once you've got them, it's fine. But unless we can take that first step, we aren't going to make the difference that we all know is possible. We can have organizations, we can have a society that is so different. We can have politics that's so different. That's a big stretch, I know, but we've got to, haven't we? We've got to try.
Absolutely.
Chris, you have a question in the chat about teenagers and mindfulness, and I'd love to hear your answer to this. And if you have any experience of teaching teenagers, because I have 2 of them, and I've learned that my example is more important than anything I say to them.
Yeah. So, you know, there's a number of aspects. So, Stephen, you know, the question, I guess, relates to the Wellcome Trust study, which was done at 25,000 students. And I think there are many factors in that study. And, you know, essentially what was done in that study was that teachers were trained to give mindfulness to students. And, you know, it's like saying we're going to get a boss to give mindfulness to their students. Do you know what I mean? It's not a psychologically safe situation. So, you know, I don't think it's necessarily surprising that that study came somewhat inconclusive in terms of its outcome. So, you know, I think that's a particular study. There are many other studies which do show that well-managed mindfulness interventions in schools do make a difference, okay? And whether that's, you know, again, whether it makes a difference in terms of that everyone should do that, that's, you know, well beyond me. But I think that it's clear that there's a lot of evidence that well-managed interventions in the right context do make a lot of difference. But of course, you know, you have to look at, you know, what the context is and what this environment is. You know, I mean, you know, it's like for me, my experience going into politics, you know, when I teach in the Bundestag, you know, I mean, they run into the room, you know what I mean? And it's like 10 minutes, like, hello, you know, hello, are you there? You know, before you kind of go, some light is shining in there, you know what I mean? And I could imagine that when I go to my daughter's school, I'm like overwhelmed by the noise. You know, I can handle a fair bit, but my goodness. So anyway, so, you know, I think there's a context issue. And then, you know, in particular, I think what Juliana said is my experience with my children. So, you know, I have children, and, you know, they think I'm the biggest joke on this side of the planet, you know, that I teach mindfulness. My goodness, you know, but that's what, you know, that's what teenagers are for. But I do notice, I never tried to push them. I just practiced. And even when my daughter was very young, she used to come in and sit on my lap and even pick my nose, you know, from below while I was trying to practice. And I think this kind of unconditional acceptance, you know, implanted something in them. And now, you know, they practice. Okay? So, yeah, so I think that, you know, I'm not, Liz, you know, you maybe can say a lot more about, you know, that I'm not a teacher in school. So I don't know, I just know a little bit about that study. And I have my experience with children. So I think that, you know, basically, whether it's in school or whatnot, but any form of mental hygiene, I think is good for children to learn, just like any form of, you know, physical hygiene is good for children to learn. Yeah. So I don't know, Liz, do you want to add something, or somebody else want to add something to this question? Or Stephen, was that helpful at all? I mean,
yeah, thank you very much, Chris. I kind of, I put it out there because there's a couple of things. One was which you responded to. Thank you very much. The other one was I was on a call the other day, and Liz was on the call, and I was taken by the fact that the Mindfulness in Schools program, which Liz runs and a few other people run here, is getting traction in primary school, but not in secondary school. And I'm just wondering, what do you think changes from children who are in primary space moving into a secondary space? Do you think it's an educational how we teach which is moving young people's minds into places where they find it boring or not useful, or is it something more? Is there something else going on? So I'm kind of interested in what's happening, maybe neurologically there, or maybe within the educational space. And I suppose the underlying question there is, how do we make, as you put it, how do we make boring interesting, especially to young people?
So again, I'll give it an attempt. There's a fantastic book called Brainstorm by Daniel Siegel, which is the neuroscience, isn't it, of the teenage brain? Is that what is that what the kind of subtitle is? Exactly, yeah. And essentially, one of the key things I remember about that is that essentially, young children are completely dependent upon their parents for survival. My 5-year-old daughter, sorry to say, wouldn't survive for like a week, whatever, if I abandon her, yeah? So therefore, they have high empathy towards their parents in the sense that they can read them, they adapt to them very precisely, okay? And that's also why you have situations of, parents misusing their children, and of course, their children still remaining loyal. It has a biological background, okay? But of course, when they reach 13, 14, or 15, that's different. And what's interesting, if you look at that book, it says that basically that the empathic centers towards the parent are down-regulated, okay? And again, from the evolutionary point of view, the benefit is that actually they begin to experiment and learn new things. So it allows for actually evolutionary learning across generations, that children make experiments and so on. So you see that, in the teenage brain, there's like an anti-empathy towards the parent or towards parental figures, an extremely heightened sensitivity to the peers. Okay? So, I think it's important to understand that, because any teaching, any openness has to go via empathy, via a sense of people being curious about the experience of the other person. Okay? So, I think that there's a basic setup in the teenage brain which is not open to learning in an empathic manner, in a feeling manner, you see, from the adult and so on and so forth. So that could be one part of it. And then of course there's the situation in schools, the noise, the dynamics, the bad teacher or whatever. I mean, I don't know, maybe again I hand this over to Liz or somebody else. I mean, I'm here an outsider to this topic.
Oh, I'll pick it up, and I see that several people have picked this up now there, and you absolutely went to the heart of that study there. It is about the skill and the authenticity of the teacher. And I would say, isn't that about every other subject? Why it's different? If you were teaching maths and you weren't enthusiastic about it, just been given a script, would you expect the children to interact in the same way? So there's the one bit about the skill of the teacher, and the an expectation that you can skill every secondary teacher up to be able to teach in this way is too much. They haven't got their doors open yet. So there would be a long way to go before that. There's skill there. But there's the other thing about how it lands with children, and they manifest their response, and this is the same with any other subject, as teenagers in completely different ways. I think we don't necessarily know what they're taking in. They don't necessarily show that in a classroom situation. And I wouldn't write off that some of this is landing. We need to be skillful in how we present it. We need to be as interactive and generous as we can there. But for the very reasons you said, the classroom is not always conducive. I wouldn't put, I wouldn't say that we haven't planted seeds that they can take out with them, and it may not come to fruition immediately, but the importance of planting seeds that they can use when they are ready, as it gradually does bubble up for them and as it does enter their hearts. So it needs to be done skillfully, but I think they don't always show immediately in a classroom situation. When you try to do a meditation, you get them to all lie down. Of course, they're going to giggle. They're not going to have the authentic experience. They don't do it outside. So I think several of us have got quite a lot of experience of that.
Yeah, I'd just add to that. I think where it has worked best is with authentic teachers who are trained mindfulness practitioners themselves and have their own mindfulness practice, rather than, here you go, we're going to show you a mindfulness course and we'd like you now to teach it to 30 children. It's really, that's problematic in so many ways. So, but I think a couple of us have mentioned that we've been lucky enough to work in schools where maybe, we were the ones delivering the training, and we ourselves have an established mindfulness practice and are able to manage some of the nuances a bit more easily than just someone who's attended a course, found out about how to teach mindfulness, and then is expected to deliver it. It's a very different situation. I don't think it's harmed any students, I mean, there's the do no harm aspect of it, but again, that had to be monitored quite closely. I know Liz, yourself and I and Sarah, we would have made sure that the students that we were teaching were not vulnerable and were okay to be in that space of learning about mindfulness, in the same way we would with adults that we might train. So.
Well, we've come to 8:30. I'm chairing the meeting, so I opened it with a welcome, Chris, and I'm going to end it with a thank you to you for zooming in tonight from Germany. And just to say, I don't think people wanted to stop there. This is the first time it's gone right to the wire, and I think that's I don't think it's poor chairmanship on my behalf. I think it's because there's an element of that. I think it is because people have been genuinely interested, and I've been looking at the faces on the screens, and there is attention there. There's engagement. There's traction. It's been a lovely, reflective, thoughtful evening, and you've taken us from the personal into the political, from the individual vibrations within our own minds and bodies, and dare I say souls, to the impact, potential impact on societal global issues. And there are many out there: terrorism, polarization, how we handle artificial intelligence, change, climate change, societal breakdown, loneliness, depression. They're all big, huge problems, and they're not going to be solved by politicians, I don't think, unless those politicians can connect with themselves, to connect with the people, and to connect with the issues. So thanks for this thought-provoking. And I was going to ask you, Chris, there were so many slides there tonight with so much information. Is it possible for you to share those with Mindfulness Wales? And I certainly will be recommended this to Diana Reynolds, who's our lead in the Welsh Government, because you've been having these discussions at the European level about false news and stuff like that. These are big implications for governments around the world. So thank you once again, Chris, for your lovely evening, and hope to see you soon.
And I love Wales. I enjoyed being in Wales.
And we love having you in Wales.
Super.
Diolch yn fawr iawn.
Diolch, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.